I've spent most of my adult life telling myself that I don't believe in ghosts. It's easier that way. You go to work, you come home, you sleep, and the world makes sense. But there are places that challenge that logic, places where the air feels different. Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky is one of those places. It was the fall of 2019, and I was driving through Kentucky on my way to visit my sister in Nashville. I'd been working as a medical transcriptionist for about 8 years, listening to doctors describe symptoms and treatments all day. When I saw the exit sign for Louisville, something stirred in me. I'd read about Waverly Hills years ago, and I remembered thinking it probably looked more interesting in photographs than in person. I was wrong about that. The GPS took me through neighborhoods that gradually thinned out, past strip malls and gas stations, until I was on Pages Lane, winding up through trees that had already started to turn. It was late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock, and the October light was that particular shade of gold that makes everything look both beautiful and slightly ominous at the same time. I pulled into the parking area and just sat there for a minute, looking up at the building. Waverly Hills doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. The main structure is this massive Gothic revival building, 5 stories of weathered brick and empty windows, sitting on top of a hill like something out of a fever dream. Even in daylight, even with other cars in the parking lot and a tour group gathering near the entrance, there was something profoundly unsettling about it. The building looked tired. That's the only way I can describe it, like it had seen too much and was exhausted by the weight of its own history. I'd booked the historical tour online the night before. The guide, Linda, gathered our group of about 15 people near the entrance. She told us that Waverly Hills opened in 1910 as a small 2-story hospital for about 40 tuberculosis patients. Back then, Louisville had one of the highest tuberculosis death rates in the country. The city sits in a valley along the Ohio River, and the stagnant air and pollution created a perfect breeding ground for the disease. Tuberculosis was called the White Plague. It was slow and merciless, eating away at people's lungs until they drowned in their own blood. By the 1920s, the original wooden structure couldn't handle the number of patients floating in, so they built the massive building we were standing in front of. Construction began in 1924, and when it opened in October of 1926, it could hold over 400 patients. 400 people, all of them dying, all of them isolated from the rest of the world because tuberculosis was so contagious that once you entered Waverly Hills, you couldn't leave, not unless you were cured, which was rare, or dead, which was common. The tour started on the first floor, and immediately I felt the temperature drop, not dramatically, but enough that I pulled my jacket tighter. The hallways were long and dark, with peeling paint and graffiti covering the walls. Years of vandalism and neglect had left their mark. Linda explained that after Waverly closed as a tuberculosis hospital in 1961, it reopened as a geriatric center called Woodhaven. That place had its own dark history: budget cuts and allegations of patient abuse, electroshock therapy used liberally. It finally shut down for good in 1982, and the building had been abandoned for almost 20 years before the current owners bought it and started giving tours. We walked through what used to be patient rooms, small spaces with rusted bed frames bolted to the floors. Linda told us about the treatments they used before antibiotics existed. They'd roll patients outside onto open-air porches, even in winter, believing fresh air and sunlight could cure them. There are photographs of patients in their beds covered in snow, still being treated, still dying. When conservative treatments failed, they turned to surgery. They'd collapse a patient's lung, hoping it would heal. Sometimes they'd remove entire lobes, or the whole lung. One procedure involved removing ribs from the chest wall to permanently collapse the lung. Patients were awake for some of these, feeling everything, hearing the sound of their own ribs being cut. We climbed the stairs to the second floor, and that's where the atmosphere really started to change. It was darker up there, the daylight from the windows not reaching as far into the corridors. Linda showed us the massive kitchen where they'd once prepared meals for 500 people. The equipment was still there, rusted and broken, industrial ovens and meat hooks, and this enormous potato peeler that everyone mistook for a meat grinder. The air smelled like mold and decay, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. One woman in our group, maybe in her 30s, suddenly stepped away from the kitchen area and out into the hallway. When I glanced at her, she was pale, her hand pressed against the wall. Linda noticed too and asked if she was okay. The woman just shook her head and said she needed a minute. She said she'd felt something touch the back of her neck. Cold fingers, she said. Linda just nodded, like she'd heard that before. By the third floor, half our group was noticeably quieter. This was the children's wing. Waverly had housed sick children separately from the adults, and Linda told us about a ghost story that people reported consistently. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, who visitors claimed to see playing with a ball in the hallways. They called him Timmy. People would bring toys and balls for him, leaving them in the corridors, and some claimed to see them move on their own. I don't know if I believe that, but standing there in that hallway, with the wind howling through the broken windows and the light fading outside, it didn't feel impossible. We climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, past the old operating rooms and the recovery wards, and then finally to the 5th floor. This was where the heliotherapy department had been, where patients with tuberculosis of the bone were treated with artificial sunlight. But the 5th floor was famous for something else, room 502. Linda gathered us in the hallway outside the room and told us the legend. In 1928, a 29-year-old nurse named Mary Hillenberg allegedly hung herself in or near room 502. Some say she was pregnant and unmarried. Others say she had an affair with a doctor who wanted nothing to do with her. Some claim she contracted tuberculosis and couldn't bear dying the way she'd watched patients die. There's a darker version suggesting it wasn't suicide at all, but staged to cover up a botched abortion. In 1932, another nurse allegedly jumped to her death from the roof patio outside room 502. No one knows why. The room is small, just an ordinary bathroom window with a single window. But standing there, even with 14 other people around me, I felt something, a heaviness, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. We didn't go into room 502. Linda said they keep it closed now because too many people have had panic attacks inside, even during daytime tours. Instead, we headed back downstairs, and she told us about the body chute. When tuberculosis was at its peak in the 1930s and 1940s, patients were dying constantly, sometimes 1 or 2 a day. The staff worried that seeing bodies being carried out would destroy what little morale the living patients had left, so they built a tunnel. It ran 500 feet down the hill from the building to the bottom where hearses would wait. They'd put the bodies on a rail cart and send them down through the darkness, away from the eyes of the living. People call it the death tunnel now. Linda asked if anyone wanted to walk through it. I should have said no, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity, made me raise my hand along with about half the group. The others stayed outside, and honestly, I don't blame them. The entrance is in the basement, and the moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. It's a steep descent, the tunnel angling sharply downward, and it's dark. Even with flashlights, you can only see maybe 20 feet ahead of you. The walls are concrete, covered with graffiti and moss, dripping with water. Our footsteps echoed weirdly, like there were more people walking than there actually were. About halfway down, I heard something. A sound like metal scraping against concrete, coming from somewhere behind us. I stopped and turned, shining my flashlight back up the tunnel. Nothing. The other people in the group had heard it too. We all just stood there for a moment, listening, but the sound didn't repeat. Linda said it was probably just the building settling, or maybe a piece of loose metal somewhere catching the wind. Maybe, but the way she said it, I got the feeling she didn't entirely believe it herself. When we finally emerged at the bottom of the tunnel, back out into what was left of the daylight, I took a deep breath. I hadn't realized how hard my heart had been pounding. The woman who'd felt something touch her neck earlier was crying quietly. She said she'd felt someone walking right behind her the entire way down, so close she could feel their breath on her neck, but every time she turned around, no one was there. We walked back up the road to the parking lot, and Linda wrapped up the tour by telling us that Waverly Hills is open for longer paranormal investigations if we were interested. 8-hour sessions where you can walk the building on your own. I thanked her and got in my car, and I sat there for a while before I started the engine. The sun was setting now, and the building was dark against the sky. I kept thinking about all those people who died there. Not 63,000 like some of the legends claim, but somewhere around 8,000 verified deaths. 8,000 people who came to that building hoping to get better, and instead died slowly, painfully, away from their families. I didn't end up visiting my sister that trip. I drove straight home instead, and I got there around midnight. I remember standing in my kitchen, making tea, trying to shake off the feeling that had settled into my bones during that tour. I've been back to Waverly Hills since then, once more in 2021, and the feeling never goes away. Whether there are actual ghosts there or not, I can't say for certain, but there's something in that place, something that remembers, something that hasn't let go. I still tell myself I don't believe in ghosts, but I also know that some places hold on to their pain. They keep it close, locked in their walls and their floors and their long, dark hallways. And sometimes when you walk through those places, that pain reaches out and touches you, just to remind you it's still there, still waiting, still watching. If you've never been to Waverly Hills, I don't know if I'd recommend it, but if you do go, pay attention, listen to what the building is trying to tell you, and if you hear footsteps behind you in the death tunnel, don't turn around. Just keep walking. Some things are better left unseen. Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are more dark tales waiting to be told, and I'll be here ready to share them with you. Until next time, stay safe out there, and remember, some places never forget.